Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. So I just recently did a whole video on books that I love that have low ratings on Goodreads, but I thought it would be fun to do the reverse. Books that have high ratings on Goodreads that didn't actually work for me. So for this, all of these books will have, in my opinion, 1 or 2 star ratings, but have significantly higher ratings on Goodreads. I'm talking like above 4 stars for a lot of these. And I have to preface this with what a 1 star versus 2 star rating means for me. Typically, the lowest rating I will give a novel is a 2 star rating. It's really, really difficult to get a 1 star rating. If it's a 1 star rating, it's a book that I wanted to DNF, but probably couldn't, or and normally if I wouldn't DNF a book, it was because I was reading it for like a book club, or like somebody had sent me a review and I felt obligated to actually read the entirety of the book, even though in other circumstances I would have DNF'd it. Or it is a book that I found deeply, deeply, deeply offensive and extremely problematic. And I do have a couple of those on here. But that's what a 1 star review is. A 2 star review, for the most part, is a book that just didn't work for me, that I really, really didn't like, but I did finish it. I didn't really plan on DNFing it, or maybe I look back and I should have DNF'd it, but it wasn't something that I was like actively hoping to DNF, and it wasn't something that completely, it didn't completely offend me the way that some of my 1 star reviews are. I think I have less than 10 1 star reviews in the entire history of my Goodreads. So yeah, 1 stars are very, very rare, but we're gonna dive in, we'll talk about this. And I'm gonna start with the highest rated books and move downwards. Fairly certain I only still own one of these books. I think I've gotten rid of all of the other ones, but I have at a 4.23 rating, The Angel of Indian Lake by Stephen Graham Jones. Now this for me was also a 2 star read, and I have a whole like 30-minute video on why this novel did not work for me. And I do actually have it right here. This is the only book that I still have, probably because I just finished reading it. I was so let down by this book. This book to me felt extremely rushed. I was a huge fan of the books that came before it in the series, My Heart is a Chainsaw, as well as The Angel of, or Don't Fear the Reaper. But this one to me just kind of felt like Stephen Graham Jones was writing the novel to get the book written to meet his publisher's date, and as I've said before, it kind of is explained that that's what happened in his afterword on this. I felt like he really just kind of disregarded a lot of the storylines that had been set up in book 2, really kind of threw aside a lot of the characteristics that I loved about Jade and the formatting of My Heart is a Chainsaw. The age of Jade was so confusing, because was she 24 or was she 45? I really don't know, even though she was allegedly in her early 20s in this story, and it just felt very, very jumbled and oversaturated with a lot of ideas that didn't work the way that I was hoping they would. I felt like a lot of characters were killed off that shouldn't have been. I felt like a lot of characters who were very, very minor characters, or not even in the book previously, became very important figures in this novel for I don't even know what reason. And I found the entire ending to be so absurdly filled with different monsters and villains and tropes that it was almost impossible to follow. And then I got very, very offended by the end of everything with how Stephen Graham Jones wrapped up some of the character stories, especially with Letha, who, by the way, just doesn't even show up for the first like 300 pages of the book. So everything I loved about the first 2 books in this one was taken away. I'm not gonna read the back of the book for this one because it will spoil the series, but My Heart is a Chainsaw is like one of my favorite things that Stephen Graham Jones has ever written. It's the story about a 17-year-old girl who is obsessed with slasher films and uses that knowledge to help her town when a real-life slasher comes to the town and starts to, you know, take out the townspeople. That's the premise of this whole story. But book 3, hugely, hugely, hugely disappointing, and I was so excited for it, and I'm really, really bummed out by it. Okay, so next up, next up, at a 4.10 rating, we have The Witching Hour by Anne Rice. This is a 1 star review for me. I hate this book. I hate this book. I had to read it for a book club I was in, and I read the entire thing. It's like over 1,000 pages. I read the whole thing, and I hated all of it. I really, really hated it. I think I kind of hate read it, to be perfectly honest. This is kind of, I think, sort of in like the same universe as Interview with a Vampire. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm fairly certain. But this is a witch angle instead of the vampire angle. And this is a beloved, beloved story that kicks off a series that Anne Rice wrote about the Mayfair witches who live in the Garden District in New Orleans. And the kind of family history line of the Mayfair witches culminating in the latest, like, powerful descendant of Mayfair witches who happens to believe, I think she's a surgeon. Yeah. I hated so much of this book because I was so shocked at how poorly this aged. There is so much racism in this book. There is so much racism. And I was just really, really offended by quite a lot of it. This book is not very kind to women either. And I was just really, really shocked by Anne Rice's overall tone in this story, that it took away from the fact that I probably would have liked the story at face value if a lot of these undercurrents were taken away. There's a lot of apologizing too with older figures who take advantage of younger children. I think that's the way I can say it, and YouTube won't flag me. And it kind of paints those characters who do those horrible things in kind of decent lights throughout the story and the history of the Mayfair witches. And for me, I was just ungodly appalled. And I couldn't believe that, one, 1,000-page book that you have to really, really, like, struggle through has this large of a rating and a huge fan base and a launch series and a TV show about it, where the undertone of just racism and misogyny and endangerment to children was so strong that I just couldn't get behind this book. I was so deeply offended, and I only finished it because I was in the book club, and I wanted to honestly be able to say how much I disliked it. If you look, I believe it's my January 2021 wrap-up video. It's one of the first videos I think I ever did for this channel. I go on a whole rant about it. I never gave this book its own review, but I do have, I believe, that video where I talk about that book pretty in depth because I was very, very angry about it. So that was one for me that I am still to this day stunned that it has such a high rating because I was so deeply, deeply offended by it. And people love it. People love it, and I just don't know why. And I wonder if it's like a nostalgia thing, or if maybe the series as a whole kind of rectifies some of the problematic issues that I had in book one, and like looking back it kind of makes sense and is setting up for something. But as a standalone novel, I was so deeply offended by that. Okay, so next up I have another book at a 1-star rating for me, but this one comes in, and this is River of Ashes by Alexandria Weiss and Lucas Astor. This is rated a 4.09. And I really do not know how. I read this book because it was the first ever book that Twisted Retreat sent in their inaugural box, and I almost completely canceled the box because I was so offended by this book. And I guess it's a series now. It is part of St. Benedict #1. I'm gonna read the premise of this one. Okay, so the premise for this book is: some truths are better kept secret. Some secrets are better off dead. Along the banks of the Bogue Falaya River, I hope I said that right, sits the abandoned St. Francis Seminary. Beneath a canopy of oaks blocked from prying eyes, the teens of St. Benedict High gather here on Fridays. The rest of the week belongs to the school and family, but weekends belonging to the river, and the river belongs to Beau Devereaux. The only child of a powerful family, Beau can do no wrong. Star quarterback, handsome, charming, the Prince of St. Benedict is the ultimate catch. He is also a psychopath, a dirty family secret buried for years. Beau's evil grows unchecked. In the shadows of the haunted abbey, he commits unspeakable acts on his victims and ensures their silence with threats and intimidation. Senior year, Beau sets his sight on his girlfriend's headstrong twin sister, Leslie, who hates him. Everything he wants but cannot have. She will be his ultimate prize. As the victim toll mounts, it becomes clear that someone must stop Beau Devereaux, and that someone will pay with their life. And I'm going to read the warning, okay? Because I did not have this warning on my copy of the book, but it says, literally in the description, warning, this book contains R-A-P-E, violence, and a psychopath's point of view, which some readers will find disturbing. And it is. It is. This is an entire book of assault on women, and I couldn't believe it. I was so greatly offended by this novel. It was graphic, and it kind of paints our main character, Beau, in this almost like Patrick Bateman style, except Patrick Bateman is a satire. Like, you don't root for Patrick Bateman. The way Beau was written, it was really disturbing. And it didn't work the way that something like American Psycho does. And I never was able to finish American Psycho. It was too much for me, I'll be perfectly honest. But I was so shocked, not only at how poorly written this novel was, but how much it kind of glorified this character in a really, like, awful way. And the scenes that kind of just, like, came out of it, too, were extremely adult and extremely graphic. And yet the whole tone of the book was really YA. And it was just icky and unsettling and disturbing, and just horrible, 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 horrible things happened to women constantly in this novel. And it was very much like, oh, like, boys will be boys kind of attitude around it. I know that the book was trying very hard to be like, this is bad, but this is something that happens in real life, but it didn't get that message across. It just kind of felt like it was almost glorifying some of his actions and trying to make him like an intriguing villain, and he was not an intriguing villain. He's a lowlife, and I hated that book. I hated it, I hated it, I hated it. And it really took like a super dark turn in the last like 20% of the book. Like, I got 80% of the way through before all of this kind of came out of nowhere and oversaturated the ending of the novel. And that's why I ended up reading it all, because had it kind of started like that at the very beginning, I probably would have DNF'd it, but it really came out of nowhere, and it was just really tragic and gross and macabre and exploitative, and I hated this novel. Okay, next, also tied at 4.9, we have The Butterfly Garden, and this is also part of a series. It is book 1 in the Collector 1, in the Collector series, I guess, by Dot Hutchinson. So again, 4.09 rating. This is a 2-star rating for me. And it had its moments that were pretty cool. But again, it felt very, very exploitative to me. So I kind of liked a lot of the concepts, but I think a lot of the execution is where it didn't work for me. And I don't understand this kind of weird glorification of these, like, evil men who prey on vulnerable women, and like just writing that to be the scare factor, because that's what made this book scary. There wasn't really anything else. It also kind of just felt like weird and campy and almost like a poorly written episode of like Brian Fuller's Hannibal, but like very, very poorly written. Like it was kind of like graphic and over the top and absurdist in a way that TV show kind of is. But again, it just wasn't refined enough to really, really work. I'm going to read the premise for you guys really quick. So it says, near an isolated mansion lies a beautiful garden. In this garden grow luscious flowers, shady trees, and a collection of precious, quote-unquote, butterflies. Young women who have been kidnapped and intricately tattooed to resemble their namesakes. Overseeing it all is the gardener, a brutal, twisted man obsessed with capturing and preserving his lovely specimens. But when the garden is discovered, a survivor is brought in for questioning. FBI agents Victor Hanoverian and Brandon Edison are tasked with piecing together one of the most stomach-turning cases of their careers. But the girl, known only as Maya, proves to be a puzzle herself. As her story twists and turns, slowly shedding light on the life in the butterfly garden, Maya reveals old grudges, new saviors, and horrific tales of a man who'd go to any length to hold beauty captive. But the more she shares, the more the agents have to wonder, what's she still hiding? So I'm actually I read this years ago, and I'm going through and I'm reading the review that I have right now, and one of the things that jumps out at me in the review that I have on Goodreads is that there's no way all of these girls just casually got Stockholm Syndrome after being captive for like 2 days. And that is absolutely something that bothered me with this novel. It was a very, very rushed storyline talking about something very, very, very heavy. And many of the characters in this book to me felt also, again, very hollow and one-dimensional. And again, we're dealing with a very, very serious subject matter. So brushing off the personalities of the victims and not creating a dynamic of enough situation for what is happening to fully happen cheapened the fact that this novel to me really just felt like somebody writing something for shock value without giving it the time that it needed. If you're going to write about something this heavy and this traumatic and this exploitative of women, then it has to be done in a way that makes sense. And if not, then you're just using those scare factors for shock value and not actually creating a story that I think would have otherwise resonated better with readers. It felt very, very cheap. And I really don't like the idea of shock value for shock value's sake. I think things that are really disturbing and unsettling to read always need to be serving a constant purpose to push the narrative forward and to get the message of the book across. And that's one of those things that I always have with extreme horror novels, and it's one of the reasons why I don't read a lot of extreme horror. But when I read something like Sugarcane, or a lot of Christopher Triana's work, or Brother by Anya Alborn, a lot of the really disturbing and graphic imagery in there is there for character development and to push a narrative forward and to say a particular message. It's not there just to gross out the reader, and I think that that is what this book did. It was very, very cheap and unsettling for me. I read this during the pandemic too, so it's a little fuzzy in my mind because I was power reading like every single day, but I remember being really, really, really disappointed by that book. Okay, I have 2 more novels. So we're going to next go in on Rootwork by Tracy Cross. Now this has an average 3.97 rating. This book for me was a 2 stars. I received this book in a Nightworms package, and I was really, really excited because I really loved the premise, which I'm going to read for you guys right now. So it says, set in a small parish in Louisiana in 1889, Rootwork follows sisters Betty, Ann, and Pee-wee. When school lets out for the summer, the girls head off to stay with their hoodoo-practicing aunt, Theodora, an empowered woman equally feared and revered by the local townspeople. They learn how to make hot foot powder and the secrets of a good black cat bone. Need to get back at an enemy? A little goofer dust will help that. The girls delight in their new hoodoo adventure until a tragic event strikes, involving the malicious town sheriff, transforming not only their lives, but also the sisters themselves. A story of love, folk magic, redemption, and independence, Rootwork explores the strength of family and the darker side of the heart. I really wanted to love this book. I loved the setting, I loved the concept, but I didn't love the overall message of this novel. This novel's big climax, I'd say, is violence is the answer. And that really struck me in a strange way, because I felt like it wasn't necessarily building up to that. I also felt the dynamics between the 3 sisters was really quite jarring, and I didn't love the style it was written in. I really didn't love Tracy Cross's voice in getting these characters across. At the same time, they felt very, very strained, but so it was very difficult for me to kind of navigate those 3 siblings. And then at the end, we get to this huge climax of the story, and all I could take from the book was that violence was the answer. And I didn't feel like the book had been leading up to that. And yes, it is, again, the launch of a series, I believe. So that's another thing that maybe if you read the series as a whole and you come back and you look at the final shots of that story, it makes more sense. But to me, it really, really rubbed me the wrong way as an introduction to this author and an introduction to this world. And I've read other novels like The Reformatory. Still very different, but still kind of similar in concepts of talking about racism in the South. And I really liked in ways the way that Tananarive handled some of her storylines and still was able to kind of say, like, hey, like, you gotta stand up for yourself and you gotta fight back, but like, egregious violence is not the answer. And I did understand the metaphor that the book was saying, and I did understand the message of the book, but I still had a hard time removing myself from the final message of the book and the metaphor that was created and the actual actions taken in the book. I don't think it was built up enough to stick the landing for me. So that was a big issue that I had with Rootwork, and I was really bummed because I really wanted to like that series and I thought that concept looked amazing. Okay, and last but not least, I'm gonna get so much hate for this, Richard Matheson's Hell House. This has a 3.74 rating. This is a 2-star rating for me. So Richard Matheson, he's most famous for writing I Am Legend. This is another big novel of his. The premise is, can any soul survive? Regarded as the Mount Everest of haunted houses, Belasco House has witnessed scenes of almost unimaginable horror and depravity. 2 previous expeditions to investigate its secrets met with disaster. The participants destroyed by murder, suicide, or insanity. Now a new investigation has been mounted. 4 strangers, each with his or her own reason for daring the unknown, torments and temptations of the mansion. Alright, I got a lot of problems with this book. Number 1, it is so misogynistic. It was written, I think, in like the 70s. It is so grotesquely misogynistic, and it just writes horrific assaults on female leads in this book in graphic detail that none of the male leads ever have to face. It's awful, it's disturbing, it's gut-churning, and it really rubbed me the wrong way. That was my biggest thing with this, which is the tone in which Matheson wrote about women. I found horrific. It was the scariest part in the whole book, was how he wrote about women and the things that happened to his female characters in this novel. The next thing that pissed me off more than anything is at the end, there's this whole kind of like, it was all for naught moment, right? And I don't want to spoil what that is, but my number 1 thing is, these are some of the most intelligent ghost hunters and intellectuals in the world who have been summoned to this house to prove if it's haunted or not. Nobody thought to like write a contract deal about what they were doing. Nobody, like, just, you know, sign something that would say that if they do this they get X, Y, and Z. Like, that drove me crazy. Like, the ending was just so, like, bizarre. Like, all these horrible, horrible, horrible things happen, and then it's just like, haha, but you know what? Because you didn't sign the dotted line, nothing will happen. Like, I was like, I'm sorry, what? What? And this is, like, just an aside. Like, it doesn't even really matter to the overall plot of this book, so I'm sorry if that was, like, a minor spoiler. But, like, what? And that's always bothered me. On top of, like, all of, like, the blatant misogyny in this book, it's just, like, bookended with stupid clerical errors. I can't. I hate this book. I almost don't want to read I Am Legend because of how much I hated this book, and I hated how Richard Matheson spoke about women. It's just really, really grotesque. And so yeah, so that has always been, oh god, just such a letdown of a novel for me, because I feel like the premise is really, really cool, and it's something that I feel like has been done to oblivion now. But when that came out, it must have been one of the first ones. I mean, obviously you have like The Haunting of Hill House too, but I loved like all of these people going and exploring this haunted house and trying to figure out what's going on. I loved that concept, hated the execution. Anyways, that is all that I have for you guys today. As always, I try to post every Monday and Thursday, sometimes on Saturdays. And if you enjoy these videos, please hit the like and subscribe buttons down below, and I will catch you all in the next one. Mwah!